Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and discover a surprisingly cheap, highly practical method to revive your dying, stressed-out plants in literally just 24 hours. If you've ever watched a beloved plant turn yellow, droop, and just look like it's one watering away from the compost bin, well, you know the exact kind of frustration we're tackling today. Honestly, you might have blamed yourself, yanked the plant out by the roots, and just started all over again. But today, we're going to look at a fundamentally different approach. It's a real game changer.
You know, when our plants look sick, most of us have this total knee-jerk reaction. We immediately reach for expensive synthetic fertilizers. But feeding a highly stressed plant synthetic fertilizer is basically like trying to force a huge heavy meal on a patient who can't even digest food. The plant is way too stressed to absorb it, and overloading the roots can actually just finish it off for good. So instead of throwing your hard-earned money at expensive synthetics, we're going to look at a 20-year-old rescue tonic developed by a veteran San Francisco gardener named Gloria. And honestly, the best part? It costs practically nothing. We're talking about 40 cents to make a full batch. It's the exact same method that completely saved a dying Cherokee purple tomato plant mentioned in our source material. Let's see how she did it.
So, Part 1, the 40-cent plant miracle and reviving the Cherokee purple.
In our source material, a gardener poured this exact tonic on a curled, yellowing Cherokee purple tomato plant on a Tuesday evening. And get this, by Wednesday morning, it was fully uncurled. 2 days later, there was brand new green growth at the top node. And that very same plant actually produced tomatoes all the way into October. It sounds almost too good to be true, right? But before we go mixing anything up to recreate that magic, we have to figure out if we're looking at a plant that can actually come back or one that legitimately requires a compost bin funeral. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with here.
That brings us to step 1. Read the plant and diagnosing the damage. Because let's be real, pouring water and fertilizer on a plant that is already completely dead at the stem, that's just a $1 lesson in frustration. You have to know how to read the signals your plant is sending you. And the absolute best way to do this is what's called the scratch test. You just take your thumbnail and scratch a tiny line on the main stem, maybe about 2 inches above the soil line. If you see green just under the surface, awesome. Your plant is alive and you can absolutely save it. What you're looking for are soft signs of stress, yellowing leaves, some drooping, maybe slow growth, or leaves curling inward without those crisp brown edges. On the flip side, though, if you scratch that stem and it's just brown and dry all the way through, or if the stem feels black and mushy or completely hollow, yeah, that's fatal rot. The plant is unfortunately done. Just compost it and move on.
Moving on to step 2, mix the tonic. Here is the 40-cent recipe.
Okay, the absolute first rule of this tonic is that you must start with exactly 1 gallon of room temperature water. Seriously, do not use cold water straight from the tap. Just let it sit on the counter for an hour, or better yet, fill your watering can the night before. Cold water literally shocks plant roots that are already heavily stressed out. Into that room temperature water, you're going to add 1 tablespoon of Epsom salt. That'll run you about 5 cents. Epsom salt provides magnesium, and magnesium is exactly what plants use to rebuild chlorophyll, which is that healthy green pigment in the leaves. When a plant turns yellow, 9 times out of 10, it is starving for magnesium. Next up, add exactly 1 teaspoon of unsulfured blackstrap molasses. That costs about 10 cents. And finally, a 1/4 cup of worm castings, which is about 25 cents. 40 cents total. It is way cheaper than a single can of synthetic plant food, and the crazy part is, it actually works.
Now, regarding those worm castings, you definitely don't want muddy chunks floating around in your watering can and blocking up the spout. So here's a really fantastic little trick. Scoop that 1/4 cup of worm castings into an old clean sock. Tie the top to create this sort of giant tea bag setup, and just drop it right into your gallon of water. Let it steep for about 20 minutes, then squeeze it out and pull it. Give the water a really good stir until the Epsom salt and the molasses are completely dissolved. When you're done, the final mixture is going to look exactly like weak coffee.
All right, step 3. Apply it correctly. Let's talk about timing and technique.
Now, this right here is where most people mess the whole thing up. They mix the tonic perfectly, but then they treat it like a regular, everyday watering routine, and it absolutely is not. Application technique is literally everything here. First things first, check your soil. Stick your finger about an inch down. If it's bone dry and dusty, the soil will actually repel the water. You need to pre-water lightly with plain water about 30 minutes prior just to wake those roots up. Then, when you actually apply the tonic, pour it nice and slow in a circle around the drip line. That's the imaginary circle directly under the outer edge of the plant's leaves. If it's a small potted plant, just use 1 to 2 cups. For a big in-ground plant, use the full gallon. And here is absolutely crucial timing. You want to apply this in the early evening. If you do a midday pour in the hot sun, the water evaporates way too quickly, leaving behind these concentrated salts in the soil that will physically burn the plant's delicate root hairs. An evening application gives those roots all night to drink it in without any sun stress.
And that brings us to step 4,
The 24-hour window. Wait and watch.
You are now entering a high-stakes window. You can expect the very first visible signs of recovery, like the uncurling of leaves and the lifting of the stems, to appear in about 12 to 18 hours. Usually, by day 3, you'll see full visible recovery along with brand new green growth right at the top. But during this wait, you absolutely must dodge 3 fatal errors. First, do not fuss with the plant. And never, ever use this on a regular weekly schedule. Remember, this is rescue medicine, not a daily vitamin. Overusing it is going to cause a toxic salt buildup. We already covered pouring directly on bone-dry soil, so always pre-water. But the biggest mistake? Using the wrong sugar. I honestly couldn't believe this when I read it, but using the wrong sugar will actually spawn a slimy, slick, gray fungal mat right across the top of your soil in 48 hours. No joke. So do not use light molasses, or pancake syrup, or table sugar. Those feed the wrong fast-acting microbes. You absolutely must use unsulfured blackstrap molasses.
Which leads us perfectly to our next section, the secret ingredient revealed, the power of molasses. This is the one ingredient people constantly skip. Why? Well, because it looks like a baking item that belongs next to a pie crust in your pantry, rather than a serious gardening tool. But understanding exactly what that one single teaspoon of unsulfured blackstrap molasses does is completely crucial. Remember, a highly stressed plant cannot absorb minerals fast enough on its own. The Epsom salt and the worm castings provide fantastic minerals, but if the plant is stressed, those minerals just sit there doing nothing in the dirt. The molasses acts as a concentrated carbohydrate wake-up call. Within hours of pouring it into the soil, the native bacteria and fungi multiply rapidly. The molasses multiplies those microbes so they can break down the magnesium and nutrients into bite-sized pieces that the weakened roots can actually easily absorb.
And this leads us straight to Gloria's golden rule, which is, honestly, the entire paradigm shift of this explainer. You don't feed the plant, you feed what feeds the plant. Let me say that again. You don't feed the plant, you feed what feeds the plant. We are not feeding the dying yellow leaves up top. We are actively waking up the dormant, sluggish soil biology underneath them. The microbes do the digesting, the roots drink it in, and the plant literally stands back up.
It really changes how you look at a potted plant, doesn't it? It's not just a plant in dirt. It's an entire living ecosystem right there in the container. So now that you have this 40-cent, 24-hour miracle protocol in your toolkit, and you actually know the science behind why it works, take a look around your home, or your balcony, or your garden. Decide which stressed yellowing plant you've almost given up on gets a second chance today. Check that stem for green, mix up your weak coffee tea bag, pour it in the early evening, and just let the microbes do the rest. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a simple baking ingredient can basically raise a plant from the dead, what other ordinary kitchen staples are secretly horticultural superpowers just hiding in plain sight?